When Big Shaq walks back into his old high school, it's supposed to be a trip down memory lane. But then Big Shaq sees something that stops him cold. High school janitor still working at 80, mopping the same floors, forgotten by the world. No pension, no retirement, no way out. And in that moment, Big Shaq makes a decision that will shock everyone. Because this isn't just about helping. This is about making things right. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where you're watching from. Share in the comments below. Shaquille O'Neal steps out of his car and looks up at the old brick building before him, Newark East Side High School. It's been years since he walked these hallways, yet the memories come rushing back instantly. The late-night practices, the sweat-soaked jerseys, the echo of sneakers screeching against the polished gym floor. This school was where it all started. But now it looks different. The paint on the walls is peeling. The once pristine basketball courts are cracked, the nets hanging on by threads. The front entrance, which used to feel inviting and full of energy, now seems tired. Shaq wasn't expecting this. He figured the school might have changed, but not like this. As he pushes open the doors, the scent of cleaning solution and old textbooks fills the air. Students brush past him, barely glancing up. They don't recognize him, not yet. But that's okay. He's not here for attention. He's here to see something for himself. Walking through the halls, Shaq feels a familiar pull in his chest. This was where everything happened. The first time he realized his size wasn't just a burden, it was a gift. The first time a coach told him, "You could be great if you work for it." The first time he felt the weight of expectations settle on his shoulders. He passes the old trophy case, where his team's championship plaque still sits, slightly dusty, but still shining. He smiles. But as he looks around, something else bothers him. The school doesn't just look old, it looks forgotten. The lockers are dented, some missing doors. The classroom windows are smudged with grime. The ceiling tiles in the hallway are water-stained and sagging. Shaq frowns. Where's the funding? Where's the care? How did things get this bad? As he rounds the corner near the cafeteria, something catches his eye. A figure hunched over slightly, pushing a mop down the hallway. The movement is slow, deliberate, but there's something strikingly familiar about it. Shaq stops. The man turns slightly, just enough for Shaq to see his face. And in that moment, his heart clenches. It's Mr. Walter Briggs, the janitor who was always there. The man who cleaned up after games, who left the gym lights on a little longer so Shaq could get in extra shots. The man who handed him a towel before a big game and said, "Go make history, kid." And now he's still here. At 80 years old. Shaq watches as Walter struggles with the mop, his frail hands gripping the handle tighter as he pushes it across the floor. His steps are slower than before, his back more bent. But his work ethic? Unchanged. Shaq feels a lump form in his throat. Why is he still here? At this age, he should be retired, resting, living comfortably, not still mopping floors in a rundown school. Shaq's stomach twists. Something about this doesn't feel right. Shaq steps forward, clearing his throat. Walter glances up but doesn't react. His eyes skim over Shaq for just a second before he goes back to his work, as if Shaq were just another passerby. Shaq's brows furrow. Does he not recognize me? It's been years, sure, but still, Walter used to call him Big Man before the world did. Now he barely spares him a second glance. That's when Shaq notices the exhaustion in Walter's eyes. Not just tiredness, something deeper, like a man who's been carrying a burden for too long. Shaq steps closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Briggs." Walter pauses, looks up again, and this time, his brows lift slightly. Recognition flickers, but it's not immediate joy. It's hesitation, like he's not sure he's allowed to believe his own eyes. "Shaquille?" Walter finally murmurs, his voice raspy. Shaq smiles. "Yeah, Big Man's back." Walter huffs out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Didn't think I'd see you walk these halls again." Shaq chuckles too, but it's forced, because now, all he can think about is why Walter is still here. He shouldn't be. He should be retired, resting, living the good life. And yet here he is, mopping floors. Shaq doesn't ask right away. Instead, he watches as Walter goes back to work, his movements slow but steady. Shaq hates it, because in his gut, he already knows. Walter isn't here because he wants to be. He's here because he has no other choice. Shaq's hands curl into fists. This school should have taken care of him. The world should have taken care of him. But it didn't. And that doesn't sit right. Not with Shaquille O'Neal. Not one bit. The silent promise. Shaq doesn't push Walter for answers. Not yet. Because this isn't a conversation for hallways and passing moments. This is bigger. So instead, Shaq just nods. "Good to see you, Mr. Briggs," he says, his voice even. Walter gives him a small smile. "Good to see you too, son." And with that, Shaq steps away. But in his heart, he's already made a silent promise. This isn't over. He will find out the truth. He will get Walter the help he deserves. And no matter what it takes, he won't let this man die holding a mop. Shaquille O'Neal can't move. His massive frame is frozen in place as he watches Walter Briggs, 80 years old, hunched, frail, struggling to push a mop across the dull linoleum floor. The same man who once stood tall, patrolling these hallways with a quiet presence that commanded respect. The same man who, years ago, tossed Shaq an extra bottle of water after practice, patted him on the back and told him, "Keep working, big man. The world ain't ready for you yet." But now his steps are slow. His hands, once steady and strong, shake against the wooden mop handle. His back curves under the weight of years of labor. And no one seems to notice. No one seems to care. Shaq's chest tightens. This isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to be. As Walter keeps working, Shaq is hit with a wave of memories. Flashbacks of long nights in the gym, when Shaq would stay after practice, drenched in sweat, chasing his dream. Walter would be there too. Not because he had to be, but because he wanted to be. "One more free throw, big man," he'd say, standing by the bleachers with a mop in one hand and a towel in the other. And when Shaq missed, Walter wouldn't let him get frustrated. "Nobody's perfect. Not even you, kid. You just gotta keep working." He was more than a janitor. He was a mentor, a quiet protector, a father figure in a school where so many kids didn't have one. But now, all that wisdom, all that dedication, it's been reduced to this. Shaq's fists clench at his sides. Shaq takes a slow step forward. "Mr. Briggs." Walter stops mopping. His hands tighten around the handle before he looks up. His eyes meet Shaq's. And for a second, Shaq expects recognition. A smile, a moment of surprise, something. But instead, Walter's face remains blank, like he's not sure if he should know him, like the years have made everything foggy. Shaq swallows hard. "It's me, Shaquille." Walter blinks. Then, his lips press together like he's searching his memory. After a few beats, he exhales. "Shaquille O'Neal?" Shaq forces a smile. "Yeah, big man's back." Walter huffs out a short, tired chuckle. "Didn't think I'd see you walk these halls again." Shaq wants to laugh too, but he can't, because this doesn't feel right. Walter looks different, not just older. There's something else in his eyes, something guarded, something tired. Shaq studies him closer. Walter's uniform is faded, the fabric stretched thin from years of washing. His shoes are worn down, soles practically falling apart. His hands, once strong, steady, are covered in calluses and cracks. Shaq's stomach twists. He shouldn't still be here. This should have been a quick visit, a handshake, a catch-up, maybe even a laugh about the old days. But the more Shaq looks, the more uneasy he feels. Why is he still working? Why isn't he home, retired, enjoying the life he deserves? Shaq glances at the mop, at the strain in Walter's arms. Then the truth hits him like a freight train. He's not here because he wants to be. He's here because he has no choice. Shaq forces his voice to stay steady. "How you been, Mr. Briggs?" Walter shrugs. "Still breathing. That's what counts, right?" Shaq nods slowly. "Yeah, but why you still here?" Walter's fingers tighten around the mop handle. There's a slight hesitation. Then he forces out a chuckle. Ah, you know me, son. Ain't got much else to do. Lieutenant. Shaq sees it in the way Walter doesn't meet his eyes. The way his shoulders tense just slightly. The way he changes the subject almost instantly. You, though. You done real good for yourself. Shaq doesn't take the bait. Instead, he asks again. You got family? Anybody looking after you? Walter's expression flickers. It's quick. Barely there. But Shaq sees it. I manage, Walter says too fast. Shaq doesn't push. Not yet. But deep down, he already knows. Walter's alone. And something's wrong. Shaq leaves the school troubled. The visit was supposed to be a nostalgic trip down memory lane. Instead, it feels like he just walked into a mystery no one else is paying attention to. Later that night, he makes a few calls. First, to Ms. Lorraine Carter, the current principal. She answers on the third ring. Shaquille O'Neal? Now that's a name I didn't expect today. Shaq doesn't waste time. I just saw Mr. Briggs at the school. Silence. Then, a sigh. Shaq's stomach tightens. That's not a good sigh. That man, Lorraine murmurs, deserves better than what life gave him. Shaq listens carefully as Lorraine tells him the truth. Walter was supposed to retire years ago, but he never did. Because he couldn't. His pension, gone. His savings, wiped out. A financial scam, one that targeted elderly workers, stealing everything they had. Walter was one of the victims. And by the time anyone realized what happened, the people responsible were long gone. Shaq closes his eyes. The anger that's been bubbling inside him now boils over. He grips his phone tighter. And no one stepped in? We tried, Lorraine says. But the school? We barely have money to fix the ceiling tiles, let alone pay for someone's retirement. Shaq shakes his head. He doesn't care about the school's excuses. He cares about Walter. And this is unacceptable. Shaq hangs up the phone and stares out his window. His mind is racing. Walter gave his life to that school, to those kids, to him. And now, when he should be resting, comfortable, safe, he's still working, still struggling, still fighting. Shaq exhales slowly. And then, he makes a decision. Walter Briggs is not going to die holding a mop. Not if Shaquille O'Neal has anything to say about it. Shaquille O'Neal sits in the worn-out office chair across from Ms. Lorraine Carter, the principal of Newark East Side High. The dim glow of an aging desk lamp flickers, casting shadows across stacks of paperwork that seem to swallow her desk. She looks tired, overworked, like someone who has tried to fix things for too long without enough tools to do it. But Shaq isn't here to talk about the school's funding problems. He's here to talk about Walter Briggs. And judging by the way Ms. Carter exhales heavily before she even speaks, he already knows he won't like what she's about to say. I figured you'd ask about him, she says, rubbing her temples. People notice Mr. Briggs, but they don't really see him. Shaq frowns. I see him. She nods. I know you do. You always did. Shaq leans forward. Then tell me, why is he still here? Why isn't he home, enjoying retirement like he should be? Ms. Carter's lips press into a thin line. Then, she tells him everything. Walter was supposed to retire years ago. He had a pension, savings, enough to live comfortably. Until he didn't, because it was stolen. Shaq doesn't move, doesn't blink, just listens. Walter, along with hundreds of other elderly workers, was caught in a corrupt financial scam. The man responsible? Raymond Holt, CEO of a private investment firm that promised secure retirements, high returns, and lifelong financial stability. Walter, trusting, hard-working, never expecting the worst in people, invested everything. And then one day, it was gone, every last cent. Shaq's jaw tightens. You're telling me he lost everything? Ms. Carter nods. The firm went under. Holt disappeared before any real consequences hit him. And Walter, he didn't fight back. Just kept working. Shaq grips the arms of his chair. He doesn't care about Holt's business failures or corporate loopholes. He cares about Walter. And this is unacceptable. Ms. Carter sighs, shaking her head. We tried to help. The school board talked about a fund to get him some relief, but Shaq lifts a hand. Let me guess. Red tape, bureaucracy. Nothing happened. She nods. Nothing happened. Shaq looks away, jaw clenched. And Walter? He never said a word. She gives him a sad smile. Would you? That hits. Shaq knows what she means. Walter Briggs is old school, the kind of man who believes in hard work, not handouts. The kind who'd rather struggle in silence than let someone feel sorry for him. And that's why he's still here, still pushing a mop at 80 years old, still pretending he's okay when he's anything but, seeing it for himself. Shaq doesn't say much after that. He just thanks Ms. Carter and leaves. But his mind is racing. He needs to see where Walter actually lives. Because if this man is still working, that means his home life isn't any better. And Shaq isn't going to sit with secondhand knowledge. He needs the truth. That evening, Shaq drives through the older part of Newark. The streets are quieter here, the buildings more worn down, weathered, forgotten. When he pulls up to Walter's address, his heart sinks. The apartment building is small, run down, paint chipping from the walls. The kind of place where the city stopped caring a long time ago. Shaq steps out of his car, his footsteps heavy against the cracked pavement. The entrance door is slightly off its hinges. The hallway smells like stale air and fading memories. He finds Walter's unit, 2B, and knocks. Silence. Then, slow, cautious footsteps. The door creaks open just an inch. Walter's tired eyes peer through the crack. For a second, he doesn't say anything. Then with a sigh, he unlocks the chain and opens the door fully. Figured you'd come. Shaq steps inside and takes it all in. The furniture is old, second-hand, barely holding together. The walls have yellowed with time, a single flickering. Light bulb casts uneven shadows across the room. But what hits Shaq the hardest? The silence. It's too quiet. No family pictures, no laughter, no warmth. Just a man who's been alone for too long. Walter shuffles toward a small kitchen table, motioning for Shaq to sit. Shaq doesn't. He looks around instead, taking in every broken thing, every sign of struggle. Walter watches him, then lets out a small, tired chuckle. Not what you expected, huh? Shaq finally meets his gaze. Number it's not. Walter sighs, leaning back in his chair. I had a plan, son. Worked my whole life, saved up, did everything right. He gestures vaguely. But life don't care about plans. Shaq stays silent. Because what can he even say? He knows that feeling. Knows what it's like when the world decides your hard work doesn't matter. Walter rubs his hands together slowly, as if trying to warm them. I thought about quitting, you know. Plenty of times. Shaq leans in. Then why didn't you? Walter lets out a breath. Because I ain't got nobody else. The words hang between them. Heavy, unshakable. I stop working, Walter says, voice barely above a whisper. Then what? I just sit here, wait for time to take me? Shaq hates this, hates every word of it. Because Walter Briggs should have more than this. He should have comfort, security, peace. He shouldn't be spending his final years pushing a mop in a forgotten school. He shouldn't be alone. Shaq can feel the frustration bubbling inside him, not just for Walter, but for every person like him. Every person who gave their life to something and got nothing in return. Every person cheated by a system that pretends to care, but never actually does. Shaq inhales deeply. Then finally he speaks. This ain't right. Walter chuckles, but there's no humor in it. No, son, it ain't. Shaq shakes his head. No, he repeats, more to himself than to Walter. It ain't. Then he looks Walter dead in the eye. But I'm gonna fix it. Walter watches him for a long moment. And for the first time since Shaq walked in, there's something new in his eyes. Not tiredness, not sadness, but hope. And though he doesn't say it, Shaq knows what he's thinking. He wants to believe. But he's been let down too many times before. Shaq nods, as if answering an unspoken question. You ain't gotta ask me how. He stands, his massive frame casting a shadow over the dimly lit room. Just know, Shaq says, voice steady. This ain't the end of your story. Walter exhales slowly, and for the first time in a long, long time, he believes it. Shaquille O'Neal isn't used to hearing no. Not when he's trying to do the right thing. Not when the person he's trying to help desperately needs it. But here he is, standing in Walter Briggs's tiny, dimly lit apartment, offering the man a way out. And Walter? Walter is shaking his head. "I don't take handouts, son," he says, his voice steady, unwavering. "A man's got to earn his way." Shaq's chest tightens. He doesn't understand. How can someone who's been through so much, someone who's been robbed, forgotten, and forced to keep working at 80 years old, still hold on to his pride like this? It doesn't make sense. And yet Walter's eyes say there's no room for argument. Shaq leans forward, his massive hands resting on his knees. "Mr. Briggs, this ain't charity. It's what you deserve." Walter just huffs a breath, shaking his head again. Deserve? Ain't about what a man deserves, Shaquille. It's about what a man earns. Shaq doesn't like this answer. Not because he doesn't respect it, but because he hates what it means. It means Walter has spent his whole life believing that struggling in silence is the only way to survive. That asking for help is the same as being weak. Shaq clenches his jaw. "But you already earned it." Walter's lips press into a thin line. "Then I'll earn it again," he says simply. Shaq exhales slowly. He's never met a man so proud and so damn stubborn in his life. Walter stands up slowly, his body moving like it's carrying the weight of every year he's worked. But his voice doesn't waver. "Been on my own a long time, son. Ain't never had no rich folks stepping in to save me. Ain't gonna start now." Shaq doesn't say anything at first. Because what is there to say? Walter isn't just turning down money. He's rejecting everything it represents. To him, accepting help means admitting defeat. And Walter Briggs doesn't do that. Ever. The room falls quiet. The only sound is the distant hum of traffic outside. Shaq leans back, studying Walter carefully. He sees the exhaustion etched into the lines on his face, the pain in his aching joints. But more than anything, he sees a man who refuses to bend, even when the world has already broken him. Shaq lets out a slow breath. He could push. He could tell Walter that pride won't put food on the table, that principles won't fix the damage done. But he knows it won't matter, because Walter Briggs will never let himself be saved. Not if it means taking something he didn't fight for with his own two hands. And that's a kind of strength Shaq both respects and hates at the same time. Walter grabs his coat. "You a good man, Shaquille," he says, pulling open the door. "But this ain't your problem to fix." Shaq's jaw tightens. "It is now." Walter chuckles. "You always was a stubborn one." He steps out into the cold night air, disappearing down the hallway before Shaq can say another word. For a long time, Shaq just sits there, staring at the empty chair where Walter had been, thinking about everything that just happened. Walter turned him down, flat out refused. Shaq should feel defeated, but he doesn't, because now he knows what he has to do. Walter isn't going to accept help, so Shaq has to find a way to help him anyway. Shaq rubs a hand over his face, thinking. Walter doesn't want charity. He doesn't want a handout. Fine. Then Shaq will give him something else. Something he can't refuse. Something that feels like earning, while still giving him the life he deserves. Shaq leans forward, elbows on his knees, his mind working fast. This isn't just about helping one man. This is about fixing a broken system. And Shaquille O'Neal doesn't lose battles. Not on the court, not in business. And sure as hell not when it comes to taking care of the people who took care of him. He knows what he has to do now. And Walter? Whether he likes it or not, he's about to get the life he always deserved. Shaquille O'Neal has dealt with a lot of things in his life. Pressure, expectations, tough opponents. But nothing makes his blood boil like what he's just learned about Walter Briggs. Because this isn't just a sad story about an old man who worked too long. This is theft. This is corruption. This is a system that let a good man suffer while the people responsible walked away richer. And Shaq? Shaq isn't the type to let something like that slide. The truth doesn't take long to uncover. Shaq hires one of the best private investigators in the game, James Coulter, a no-nonsense former FBI agent with a reputation for digging up dirt that people want buried. It takes less than a week for Coulter to call him back, and when he does, his tone is cold. "Shaq," Coulter says, voice tight, "you're gonna want to sit down for this." Shaq doesn't. "Just tell me." Coulter exhales sharply. "Your guy, Walter Briggs, he's one of hundreds of retirees who got robbed by the same man." Shaq's grip on his phone tightens. Raymond Holt, a high-profile financial executive who built his empire on helping retirees manage their pensions. In reality, he bled them dry. Holt ran a predatory investment scheme, promising guaranteed returns while funneling their money into his own pockets. By the time authorities caught wind of it, Holt had already moved the money, shut down the firm, and disappeared. No charges, no consequences. And the people he scammed left penniless. Shaq listens in silence as Coulter runs through the list of victims: teachers, factory workers, janitors, people who spent decades doing honest work, only to be left with nothing. Walter's name is just one of many, and nobody fought back. Because fighting back takes money, takes power, takes the kind of resources these people never had. Holt knew that. He counted on it. And that's why he's still out there living large, while Walter Briggs is still mopping floors. Shaq's fists clench. Not anymore. Shaq has seen a lot in his life. But this is different. Because this isn't just about helping Walter. This is about justice. This is about making sure no one else suffers the way Walter did. Shaq's voice is low, steady, but full of fire. "Where is he now?" Coulter doesn't hesitate. "I already found him." Shaq's breath steadies. This fight just became personal. Shaquille O'Neal doesn't fight battles halfway. When he steps onto the court, he dominates. When he builds businesses, he wins. And when someone wrongs the people he cares about, he makes sure they pay. Raymond Holt thought he could steal from hardworking people and walk away clean. Thought no one would come for him. He was wrong, because Shaq is coming. And he's not coming alone. Lighting the firestorm. The first step? Make the world pay attention. Holt operated in silence. Shaq? He's about to be the loudest voice in the room. He calls in every favor, every connection, every major media outlet he knows. Within 24 hours, the story is everywhere. Millionaire financial mogul stole retirements. Shaquille O'Neal calls for justice. NBA legend takes on corrupt executive, and he's not backing down. Victims speak out, how Raymond Holt destroyed lives. It's on Twitter, it's on TV, it's unstoppable. The victims speak. At first, Holt tries to ignore it. Bad press, he's had worse. But then, the victims start talking. Walter's story hits the hardest. A video of him standing in his faded janitor's uniform, hands rough with years of labor, telling the world how Holt stole his future. The video goes viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. And with every share, every like, every retweet, Holt loses power. The investigation begins. Shaq's strategy works faster than even he expected. By the end of the week, lawyers start circling, politicians start asking questions. And the FBI? They're suddenly very interested in Holt's financial history. Holt isn't untouchable anymore. The confrontation. But Shaq isn't done. Because this isn't just about exposing Holt. It's about making him fix what he broke. So Shaq tracks him down. A private golf club in Florida. Exclusive, expensive, a playground for the rich. Holt doesn't see Shaq coming. Doesn't notice him at first. But when he does, his whole body tenses. Because Shaq is impossible to ignore. 7 feet 1 inch. 250 pounds of unshakable force. And he's walking straight toward him. The offer. Shaq doesn't sit. Doesn't shake hands. He just looks down at Holt, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You took something that wasn't yours. Now you're gonna fix it." Holt laughs, a forced, nervous chuckle. "Is that right?" he says, trying to keep his cool. "And what exactly do you think I owe you?" Shaq leans in slightly, not threatening, but close. "You don't owe me a damn thing. You owe them." He pulls out a folder. Inside, the full list of Holt's victims, names, amounts, lives he ruined. Shaq sets it on the table. You pay them back, every cent, quietly, no excuses, no loopholes. Just do the right thing. Holt looks down at the folder, then smirks. You think you can scare me into giving up my money? Shaq chuckles, shakes his head. You think this is about fear? Then he leans in further. I've already taken everything from you. You just don't know it yet. Holt's smirk fades, because suddenly he does know it. The bad press, the investigation, the fact that his name will never mean power again. Shaq didn't come here to ask. He came to end this. And Holt? Holt has nowhere left to run. But even now, even with everything crumbling, he still refuses. Nice try, O'Neal, Holt says, standing up, but I don't break that easy. Shaq watches him go, and he lets him. Because Holt doesn't realize something. Shaq isn't walking away defeated. He's walking away knowing exactly what happens next. Because if Holt won't do the right thing willingly, Shaq will make sure he doesn't have a choice. Raymond Holt thought he could walk away. Thought he could laugh in Shaquille O'Neal's face and keep his stolen money. Thought his wealth, his lawyers, and his connections would protect him forever. He thought wrong. Because Shaq? He doesn't lose. Not on the court. Not in business. And definitely not when it comes to justice. Shaq could have walked away. Could have let the media finish what he started. Could have waited for the FBI to do their job. But that's not enough. Because if Holt still thinks he has power, Shaq is about to rip it away. Holt may have shut down his fraudulent firm, but his real empire still exists. A financial corporation that still controls millions in assets. A company where Holt, despite the scandal, still sits at the top. And that's about to change. Shaq makes one phone call, then another, then 10 more. Because money talks. And Shaq, he's got plenty of it. Within days, he does the unthinkable. He buys out the very company that destroyed Walter's future, becomes its biggest shareholder. And the first thing he does? Fires Raymond Holt. The moment the announcement hits the news, Holt goes into panic mode. 1 second, he's still clinging to power. The next, he's being escorted out of his own building. Reporters swarm him as he steps onto the sidewalk. Mr. Holt, how does it feel to be removed from your own company? Shaquille O'Neal just took over. What's your next move? Holt doesn't answer. Because he doesn't have one. For the first time in his entire life, he's powerless. Shaq could have stopped there. But Holt still needed to face the people he hurt. So Shaq makes sure the truth is broadcasted everywhere. A national news special, exposing Holt's entire fraudulent history. The stolen pensions. The bank accounts drained overnight. The lives were ruined. And at the center of it all, Walter Briggs. His story, his struggle, his pain, laid bare for the world to see. The public erupts in anger. The pressure builds. And finally, the FBI moves in. Holt is arrested on live television, and just like that, the man who thought he was untouchable is gone. The very next day, Shaq walks into Walter's tiny apartment, but this time, he isn't empty-handed. He places a folder on the table. Walter stares at it. What's this? Shaq leans back. Your pension, every last cent. Walter doesn't move, doesn't speak, just looks down at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. You did this? He finally asks. Shaq nods. Yeah, and you didn't have to earn it this time. You already did. Walter swallows hard, and for the first time in a long time, he lets himself breathe. For the first time in decades, Walter Briggs wakes up with nothing to worry about. No alarm clock at 4 a.m. No aching joints as he pushes a heavy mop down the hallways of Newark East Side High. No more counting pennies, skipping meals, or wondering how much longer he can survive like this. Because everything has changed. And it's all because Shaquille O'Neal wouldn't take no for an answer. Walter sits in his worn-out recliner, staring at the folder on his table. His pension, restored. Every cent Holt stole given back to him. He should feel relief. But instead, there's something else. A heaviness in his chest he can't quite shake. A knock at the door pulls him from his thoughts. He already knows who it is. Walter stands slowly, his knees creaking. When he opens the door, Shaq is standing there, grinning. But this time, Shaq isn't alone. Behind him, 3 black SUVs idle at the curb. And standing next to them, a film crew. Walter's brows pull together. What the hell is this? Shaq chuckles. Your retirement party. Walter blinks. I already retired, son. Shaq shakes his head. Nah, not like this. Walter doesn't ask questions. He's too old for guessing games. So when Shaq tells him to get in the car, he just grumbles and climbs in. The ride is quiet, but Walter can feel something shifting. Like the weight he's carried for so long is finally slipping away. When they pull up to a quiet suburban neighborhood, Walter's breath catches. The houses here are nothing like his tiny apartment. They're new, well-kept, safe. But when Shaq leads him up the walkway to a single-story home with a perfect white porch, Walter stops cold. Because his name is on the mailbox. Walter Briggs. Walter turns to Shaq, his voice barely above a whisper. What is this? Shaq claps a massive hand on his shoulder. Your new home. Walter doesn't move at first, he just stares. Shaq nudges him forward. Go on, take a look. Walter steps inside, and his knees almost give out. Everything is perfect. The leather recliner, just like the one he lost years ago when he couldn't afford to keep it. A kitchen stocked with food, a framed photo on the wall, a picture of him at Newark East Side High, standing next to a young Shaquille O'Neal. Walter grips the back of a chair to steady himself. I never asked for this, he whispers. Shaq smiles softly. You didn't have to. But Shaq isn't done yet. Walter shakes his head, still overwhelmed. Son, this is too much. Shaq chuckles. Nah, this was the easy part. Walter frowns. Easy part? Shaq's grin widens. We got one more stop. The ride back to Newark East Side High is quieter than before, but this time, Walter's heart isn't heavy, it's full. Shaq pulls up to the front of the school, and when Walter steps out, his breath catches. Because the school, the place that had been falling apart for years, doesn't look the same anymore. The doors are new, the windows shine, and the gym? The gym has been completely rebuilt. Walter's head turns sharply. What did you do? Shaq just grins. Go see for yourself. The name that will never be forgotten. Walter steps into the gymnasium, and it nearly knocks the wind out of him. New floors, new bleachers, fresh paint. But what makes him stumble back in shock? The giant gold letters above the entrance. The Walter Briggs Gymnasium. Walter stares. Disbelief. Shock. Emotion rising too fast for him to stop it. You didn't, he murmurs. Shaq nods. I did. Walter's lips tremble. Why? Shaq places a hand on Walter's shoulder, voice steady. Because you spent your whole life lifting people up. Shaq gestures to the court. Now it's your name that'll lift them up. Walter Briggs is not a man who cries. Not when he lost his wife. Not when he lost his home. Not when he lost his future. But now he breaks. Tears slip down his weathered cheeks. Not from sadness, but because for the first time in decades, he doesn't feel forgotten. Doesn't feel like just another man lost in the system. He feels seen, respected, loved. Shaq gives him a moment. Lets him take it all in. Then, after a long beat, he chuckles. You okay, old man? Walter lets out a shaky laugh. Damn you, Shaquille. Shaq grins. I'll take that as a yes. Walter Briggs never asked for recognition, never asked for a gym named after him, never asked for a new home, but he deserved it. And now, his legacy will live forever. Every time a kid walks into that gym, they'll see his name, they'll hear his story, and they'll know that sometimes the people who change lives the most aren't the ones in the spotlight. They're the ones quietly pushing a mop, making sure the floors are clean for the next generation to chase their dreams. And thanks to Shaquille O'Neal, Walter Briggs will never be forgotten again. Walter Briggs never asked for attention, never expected his name to be known, never thought he'd be anything more than a janitor with a past no one cared to ask about. But now the whole world knows who he is. And for the first time in his life, it's not because of what he lost. It's because of who he is. It starts with a single post. A photo of Walter Briggs standing outside his new home, looking stunned, overwhelmed, grateful. Shaquille O'Neal just changed this man's life. He gave him his pension back, gave him a house, named a gym after him. This is what real heroes do. The post explodes. Within hours, it's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Within a day, it's on national news. People start sharing Walter's story, not just about what he lost, but about who he was before that. A man who worked tirelessly, never complained, never asked for more than what he earned. A man who spent years lifting up the students at Newark East Side High, expecting nothing in return. And the more people hear his story, the more they fall in love with it. The comments flood in. We need more people like Walter in the world. This man spent his life serving others, and no one noticed, until now. Shaq didn't just give him money, he gave him respect. The hashtags start trending. Walter Briggs, story, honor our elders. Shaq did it again. People don't just watch, they act. Donations pour in for other retired workers who lost their pensions. Schools across the country start raising funds for the janitors who kept their halls clean for decades. And suddenly, Walter's story isn't just his own anymore. It's a movement. 1 week later, Walter and Shaq sit side by side on national television. The interviewer, a well-known journalist, smiles at Walter. How does it feel, Mr. Briggs, knowing that your story has inspired so many? Walter shifts uncomfortably. He's never been one for the spotlight. But then, he looks at Shaq, sees the pride in his eyes. And for once, he lets himself be proud, too. Walter clears his throat. I never expected any of this, he says slowly. Didn't think my story mattered much to anyone. He glances at Shaq. Guess I was wrong. Shaq chuckles. Yeah, you were. The interviewer turns to Shaq. You've always been known for your generosity. But this was different. Why? Shaq leans forward, his expression serious. Because some people do everything right in life, and they still get left behind. He looks at Walter. He deserved better. And if I can make that right, I will. Walter blinks hard. He still isn't used to being the man people fight for. The interview ends, but Walter's life will never be the same. He's not just a retired janitor. He's a symbol of resilience, proof that even the quietest lives deserve to be honored. And in the end, Walter learns one last lesson. Sometimes, it's okay to let others lift you up, especially when you've spent your whole life lifting others. How many Walters are out there? Hardworking, forgotten, waiting for someone to notice. Injustice doesn't fix itself. It takes people willing to stand up, speak out, and make things right. Next time you see someone overlooked, don't just walk past. Because real change, it starts with you.